So the Eagles have a few reasons to be wary of the Kansas City Chiefs, but there's no greater reason than Patrick Mahomes. He's not only absolutely lethal in the playoffs, but when you see how well he performs based on a couple factors that will be in play in the Super Bowl, you'll see why the Eagles should be afraid even if they refuse to admit it. So I've got to talk about that, a former Chiefs coach back in the NFL in a surprising role, a few key players to watch on the injury report, and more. But first, how about those? All right, first up, it's officially Super Bowl week with both teams flying in and landing yesterday. Well, of course, the Pro Bowl games were also going on yesterday for every other team not playing in the Super Bowl. The NFC, if you care, the NFC ended up winning for the third straight year, but honestly, I don't really know anybody that cares about the Pro Bowl games as it's recently become a bit of a joke. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy for the players who make it as it helps them out monetarily and still adds value to their resumes, but RBT sums this all up pretty nicely when he tweeted this out. It still blows my mind knowing I grew up watching an actual Pro Bowl game every year, but now they're out there playing dodgeball. Yeah, there were some cool moments in the Pro Bowl games, don't get me wrong, but nah, I'm glad the Chiefs haven't had to worry about that in years. And before I get more into Super Bowl week, Super Bowl content, there's a bunch there. I did find it interesting that former Chiefs offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy is back in the NFL after coaching last year with UCLA. What was a bit surprising is that it was announced yesterday he's taken a bit of a demotion, going back to running backs coach for the first time since 2017. It's been an interesting few years for Bieniemy, who left KC after the 2022 season to become the offensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders. Ron Rivera was the head coach then, a defensive-minded guy. So this gave EB the reins and control on the offensive side of the ball. Well, he only lasted there 1 year, with the Commanders falling to 4-13 and boasting one of the worst scoring offenses that year. They were 25th. He then went back to the college ranks to UCLA, where he was their running backs coach from 03 to 05, but this time as their offensive coordinator. And that also only lasted a year. They finished the season 5-7, and from there, EB reportedly wanted to return to the NFL to coach, with lots of Chiefs fans saying, hey, he should be brought back to the Chiefs, maybe even to replace Matt Nagy as the offensive coordinator next season. Well, that is not happening. EB is officially off the board, getting hired by the Chicago Bears yesterday as their running backs coach. A good get for them, in my opinion. EB is a former running back himself and brings with him a ton of coaching experience. Ben Johnson is obviously the head coach over there, building up his coaching staff. Meanwhile, the GM over there in Chicago is former Chiefs front office guy Ryan Poles, who served in various capacities with KC for 13 years before getting hired as their GM in 2022. So maybe Ryan Poles had a bit of an influence there, bringing EB to Chicago. Either way, the Eric Bieniemy back to KC chatter is now officially done for the year. If the Chiefs wanted him back, I would think they could have offered him something. But when EB put feelers out, the Bears running backs coaching position, I guess, was the most enticing offer for him. And so to the Bears, Bieniemy goes. And from here, we got to get into more Super Bowl week content, talk about an injury that popped up for the Eagles, a surprising one on Friday. And then we've got to talk about how great Patrick Mahomes is playing in domes, which is where Super Bowl 59 will be played. But first, I got a question for you. Have you ever Googled yourself, a family member, or a loved one and been shocked by how much personal information was publicly available? Well, I got a story for you. Some of you may remember the time my friends over at All Chiefed Up sent me a pizza to congratulate me for reaching 20,000 subs a couple years ago during a live stream, which was nice of them, but the problem was I never sent them my address. How did they get my address? Well, I found out my address was publicly available online, and that's where the sponsor of today's video, Aura, can help remove your personal information from data brokers and people search sites that can sell your info to identity thieves, scammers, and more. That's just the beginning though, because Aura is your all-in-one protection from identity theft, scams, and online threats for the entire family. From data broker opt-out, as I just mentioned, to identity theft protection and financial fraud protection, a VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more, Aura is here to help proactively protect you and your family. And that's why I'm grateful to be able to get this all-in-one app at one affordable price, because I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. And if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/HBTC to try 2 weeks for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. So to support the channel and give Aura a try for yourself, the link to sign up is in the description and pinned comment down down below. All right, so during the Pro Bowl games and all that going on yesterday, the Chiefs were escorted to the airport by the KC police, with some players like Hollywood Brown getting a much welcomed send-off from his neighborhood. Pretty cool to see the community rallying behind the guys as they head off to their third Super Bowl in a row. Obviously, not every player has played in all those, but it's just insane. 7 conference championship appearances in a row. Unreal dynasty stuff that we cannot take for granted. Anyway, they thankfully landed safely in New Orleans and are now gearing up for their annual opening night event, which is tonight, Monday, February 3rd at 7 p.m. Central. The Eagles interviews will go first, then the Chiefs. Honestly, all week will feature a lot of interviews from nearly every player. There's a ton going on, but I'm grateful this experience isn't a new one for many on the team. Shoot, the Eagles were just in a Super Bowl a couple years ago, so they are also familiar with the process as well. Even with that Super Bowl experience on both teams or from both teams, there's several players making their first ever Super Bowl appearance. I'm just going to talk about Chiefs players. Of course, there are the rookies like Worthy, Kingsley, Jared Wiley, who tore his ACL, Jaden Hicks, among others, including UDFAs and all that. But there's also a few notable veterans. You have Hollywood Brown, Kareem Hunt, and DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins had a pretty awesome PSA today on his X account in regards to that, saying to all the kids out there living in small towns, in small houses with single parents, to the kids who see violence, who see loss, who don't get the resources they deserve, but who still have big dreams. Know that I was a kid in your exact shoes, and this week I'm playing in the Super Bowl. Don't give up. Work hard. Keep believing. Where you start doesn't determine where you end up. Well, that is quite the message from DHOP to everybody out there who aspires to just chase greatness and wants to be something someday. It doesn't matter where you come from. Put your head down and get to the grind. And it's really cool to see his rise, and I hope DeAndre Hopkins gets his first ever ring on Sunday. Now, with that being said, there's a lot to take in during Super Bowl week, and it's easy to get distracted by it all. Well, that's why the game plans were put in place last week, followed by basically a regular week of practice of sorts, and there was an injury report with obligatory game designations put on there. And while I won't read too much into this given the fact that there's still a week to go, there's some players for the Eagles worth talking about, as well as one Chiefs player I'll get to here in a moment. But 4 Philly players were listed as questionable. 3 of the 4 have their 21-day window to return from IR open, with those 3 being tight end CJ Uzomah, defensive end Brandon Graham, and wide receiver Britton Covey. I'm not sure how many if any of these guys actually get brought back from IR, but the most notable of these 3 to me is, of course, Brandon Graham, who tore his triceps late in November. If he returned, even on a limited snap count, that would be a welcomed help along their defensive line for sure. Back in 2008, defensive tackle Hollis Thomas tore his triceps and was able to return to play in 2.5 months. So Brandon Graham absolutely could play this Sunday. I'm just not sure how much, if at all. Someone else worth noting is going to be the 4th player listed as questionable, with that being running back Kenneth Gainwell. He suffered a concussion in the 3rd quarter of the NFC Championship and is still currently in the protocol. The good news for him, though, of course, is that he has this week to clear it, an extra week. Gainwell finished the year with 75 carries for 290 yards behind only Hurts and Saquon for their running back, or rushing leaders rather, so he definitely has a role to play in this offense if he can clear protocol in time. The last few players to talk about real quick with the Eagles is going to be center Cam Jurgens, back guard Landon Dickerson knee, and then their first-team All-Pro linebacker Zach Bond. More on him in a minute, but Jurgens and Dickerson, they didn't practice all week last week, and they were both banged up in the NFC Championship game. Jurgens dressed, but initially didn't play, staying on the sidelines kind of in case of emergency. Dickerson then took his place at center, and his knee was bothering him so much that he ended up leaving the game, and Jurgens had to come in and finish it out. I'm sure both of these guys do play, but how close to 100% will they be, and can they last the entire game? With the interior a bit banged up for Philly, I'd be looking for Chris Jones, Turk Wharton, a Minihue if he kicks inside, Dana, anybody to make a couple of huge plays in the game later down the stretch. 3rd or 4th quarter, be looking for that. Now, the most interesting guy on the Eagles injury report is actually their first-team All-Pro linebacker, Zach Bond. He fully participated at practice all week, so Wednesday, Thursday, I think Wednesday was estimated, but Thursday was a practice. Then he popped up Friday with a groin injury of sorts. I don't know how bad it is, but he did not practice. Like everybody else on the team, I'm sure he will gut it out and play. But if that groin injury gets more aggravated during the week at practice, during the game, that could limit his explosiveness, and there's no way around it. This would be A tough loss for the Philadelphia Eagles. The guy leads the team in forced fumbles with 5. He leads the team in total tackles on the season with 150. He's second on the team with 11 tackles for a loss, only behind Jalen Carter, who has 12. On top of that, he's got 14 QB pressures and played 95% of snaps before resting Week 18. Then in their 3 playoff games, he's racked up 26 tackles, 2 of those for a loss, forced a fumble, recovered 2 fumbles, broke up 2 passes, and also caught an interception. Basically, this guy is an absolute playmaker and will be worth keeping eyes on this week. If he can't go, combined with the amount of zone coverage they play, hello, Travis Kelce in the middle of the field. Now, speaking of Chiefs players, they look extremely healthy in comparison. This is why the first-round bye was so important, because the difference for each team is pretty staggering. The Eagles had 15 players on their report. Meanwhile, KC only has 5. That includes safety Brian Cook, quad, quarterback Patrick Mahomes, ankle, right tackle Jawan Taylor, knee, cornerback Jalen Watson, ankle, and finally, wide receiver Skyy Moore, abdomen. The first 4, they were full goes all week and are definitely playing in this game. I have 0 worries about any of them. Then for Skyy Moore, his 21-day window to return from IR was opened up last week, and everybody was kind of like, well, why? Well, when your window opens up, that means you can practice with the team. So Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest pointed out that while him being listed as doubtful to play means the team most likely is not bringing him back to the 53-man roster from IR, he's a nice scout team element to help the team prepare. So basically, no Skyy Moore corndog touchdown is incoming for this Super Bowl. Sorry in advance. And then we need to talk about a very interesting stat that's been floating around recently, and that is how awesome Patrick Mahomes is while playing in a domed stadium. He's actually undefeated, 12-0 to be exact. He did lose to the Colts in 2022 in their stadium, but the retractable roof was open, okay? So that doesn't count. Now, let's look at these stats because they get even crazier when you start to break them down by game. We'll look at all 12 first. He has a 66.46 completion percentage, a passer rating of 103.7, has thrown for over 3,600 yards, 26 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions in those 12 games. Well, that's an average of 304 yards a game, 2.16 touchdowns, and just 0.33 interceptions while playing on average in a domed stadium. Then on the ground, Mahomes has 49 rushing attempts for 283 yards, rushing for an average of nearly 6 yards per attempt. And this isn't specifically to dome stadiums, but if you keep the rushing stats going, Patrick Mahomes in his 4 Super Bowl games, he averages even closer to that 6 yards per attempt mark. And in the playoffs in general, he has 7 postseason rushing touchdowns and averages a first down nearly 40% of the time when he scrambles. And as we've all seen as recently as last week, Mahomes can absolutely use his legs on designed QB runs. They just rarely ever call them. And he even ran 2 in himself in the AFC Championship. So if you combine his playoff rushing stats with his average passing stats, a little bit of his rushing stats as well in dome stadiums, I think we are in for an absolute classic performance from Patrick Mahomes in this one. And I know some of you look at that dome stat and say, well, who cares? This is the Eagles. They're a great defense, and Patrick Mahomes hasn't gone up against a passing defense like this in quite some time. Well, would you believe me if I told you that in the playoffs, Patrick Mahomes is 3-0 against number 1 passing defenses? Brady is 2-1, Manning's 1-1, Steve Young and Lynn Dawson are the same as Manning. So it's safe to say that it really doesn't matter. Combine the fact that Mahomes is in a dome, no elements to play a negative factor in this one, and then yeah, the Eagles are dogs. They have the number 1 passing defense, the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL, but that has not stopped Patrick Mahomes before. I mean, just look at this graphic thanks to NFL Network. Patrick Mahomes versus number 1 passing defenses in these 3 games. 37 points per game is what they've averaged. 3-0, obviously, I just shared that. Completion percentage of 70.8. Passing touchdowns per game is an average of 2.7 and an average of a 108.5 passer rating. That all ranks first among all quarterbacks with 2 or more playoff starts against a number 1 passing defense since 1950. There's a lot riding on this game. For sure, Jalen Hurts has the chance to become the first quarterback to lose his first Super Bowl appearance, to then make it back and win one. If they win, that would be the first quarterback to accomplish this since John Elway. The last 19 quarterbacks before Hurts who lost their first Super Bowl never even made it back. Hurts is the first since Jim Kelly. Then on the flip side, Andy Reid has the second most playoff wins as the head coach with 27, just 4 behind Bill Belichick, which could be just 3 behind Bill with a win on Sunday. In Super Bowl wins, Big Red is tied with Joe Gibbs and Bill Walsh with 3, but could join Chuck Noll with 4, putting him tied for second, only 2 Super Bowl wins behind Belichick. For Patrick Mahomes, if he helps his team secure a three-peat, obviously that will help solidify him in the GOAT conversation because nobody's ever done that, but that will be his 4th Super Bowl win, tying him with only Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw for second most. He would accomplish all of this before the age of 30, by the way, which is crazy because Tom Brady didn't win his 4th Super Bowl until the age of 37. Next, Travis Kelce needs just 3 receptions to record the most catches in Super Bowl history. And then if KC does win, defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo would get his 5th ever Super Bowl ring, which is already history for a coordinator, winning a Super Bowl with 2 different franchises. Next up, Roger Goodell was asked a couple of questions, hilarious questions, at his Super Bowl press conference today. He was actually asked about the public perception in which the refs are favoring the Chiefs and his thoughts about it. Well, of course, Goodell basically laughed and said that's a ridiculous theory for anybody who might take it seriously. The haters say, well, of course he's not going to admit to rigging within his own league. No, it's just because the average IQ on this planet in 2025 is nearly equivalent to a literal acorn, so many people believe the dumbest thing. Some believe the moon is a Russian satellite, others think the earth is actually flat, so yeah, sure, the refs favor the Chiefs, even though no metric you give them, no stat you present shows that it actually takes place. But sure, the refs are rigging it for the Chiefs. Yeah, okay, that's not all though, because Goodell was also asked if he was worried about quarterbacks flopping, since I guess Mahomes had one bad flop trying to sell a hit near the sideline and the masses literally melted down about it. I mean, never mind the fact Josh Allen has done this almost every week since he came into the NFL, but Mahomes has one bad flop and now the conversation shifts to quarterbacks flopping being a real concern, and Goodell is asked about it at his Super Bowl presser. Well, he of course said it hasn't really been an issue, but of course the competition committee will continue to discuss things like this in the future. It's hilarious where we are as Chiefs fans and what happens with the Chiefs. Anything they do, it's scrutinized, held up under a microscope, and everybody just wants to hate on greatness. But with all that being said, let me know your thoughts on Goodell himself actually being asked these questions at his presser, as well as your thoughts on Mahomes playing in domes and going up against #1 passing defenses in the playoffs. Is there an advantage here or nah? And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?